sounds much more sure than I am. All right, so apparently we are live now.
It'll go up at like, it should be a couple, like a few minutes behind, like what's actually live.
I gotcha. So my counter is showing live, so we'll just kind of pretend that it is, and we'll go from there. Hello, everyone. This is Andrew with Collectors Corner Incorporated over in Midland, Michigan. And this is our first attempt going live, so please bear with us as we kind of play around with this. But hopefully we'll have a lot of fun, and I'll just jump right into it. Today we have with us Travis Mcintire, also from the Tri-City areas here, and with Source Point Press. And we've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about. But first, hey, Travis, how's everything going?
Good, man. I mean, relatively good, right? I would say things are going pretty well. Interesting year in the publishing business, interesting year in comics, interesting year in games. You know, there's been a lot of ups, a lot of downs. There were some moments where we thought we were getting ready to shutter everything. And some moments where we were like, I can't believe we figured this out. It's going so well. But right now, we're kind of ending the year on a high note. You know, we've been working with a company called Conglomeration over the last several months, doing a comic based on a really popular game called Gloomhaven. And I ended up writing the script, and it hits shelves, in 3 days now?
Wednesday, so, that's correct. As a matter of fact, we are also going to be giving away one copy of the #1 issue to a random person that's here watching us live and hanging out with us. Just make sure you guys put your make a comment on one of our live feeds, and we'll just randomly take a name and deliver that comic book to you. If you're here locally, if you're not in the Midland area, we'll have to ship it out to you, but just reach out to us, send either Travis or myself a direct message, and we'll make sure we get that to you. But just thank you from Collectors Corner to you guys coming out and checking out what we're doing with this live broadcast. So, you guys also have like some limited exclusive variants and stuff that I saw you guys have on your web. Have you gone through all those?
Yeah,
talk to those.
No, there's some. We did. So Gloomhaven was a pretty big release for us. So there's a decent number of the variants. They end up being about 1 in 50s if you look at them in the kind of the sort of, if they were a diamond variant, that would be the print run sizes are about 150 from the normal one. So what we did is we did 2 variants. One is done by Nolan Nasser, who is not only one of my business partners, but also a great artist in his own right. He's a well-known game artist. He did the art for a really popular game called Spirit Island. He did some of the art design for that. He did many other, pieces of game art here and there. Accomplished digital artist. He's done a ton of stuff for us, and he's a huge fan of Gloomhaven. He actually kind of does a weekly show where him and his friends are actually playing through Gloomhaven. So he really wanted to do one, and we wanted to throw him a bone and all that. So he did one. It's a beautiful cover. So that's sort of what we refer to as the Source Point variant. And then Cephalofair, who are the publishers of Gloomhaven, the original game artist wanted to do a cover. So he did one cover.
Oh, nice.
So there are 2 variants for it. And then there's the normal cover that was done. Nolan actually colored it, and the pencils and inks were done by Tyler Souls, who has done some events back when at the old Collectors Corner.
Right,
If you remember Tyler coming up a few times.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he did a mini-series for us last year called Hank Steiner, which is like a detective Frankenstein story. It's pretty cool.
I think I think I actually have some of the original ones that he released still floating around in our storage.
The self-published ones before we took it? Yeah, those ones, it's the same cover art, but those ones are like the background is brown as opposed to green.
Oh, okay.
And there's only like 200 of them out there in the world, those brown background ones.
Nice.
But yeah, that was the ones he self-published before we signed the book, and then we did the 3-issue mini, and ended up doing pretty well with it. Actually, it's a fun little book, and he was, when we first started talking to Isaac, the owner of Suffolk Fair and the designer of Gloomhaven. We sent him quite a few different samples of different artists that I liked, that I was like, these are kind of the guys. And there were a couple that I'd worked with before that I thought fit really well. And what I sent him, and Tyler was sort of my first choice. You get into this sort of like weird, this weird thing where you don't want to push somebody on something too hard because you feel like that makes them want to push back.
Sure.
So I sent a whole bunch of stuff, and I sent him Mcintire number 3, which I think is just brilliant work. And then Tyler has also done some Godzilla work. And Gloomhaven, of course, is like, it's dark fantasy. It's got some steampunk elements. It's got monsters and all that kind of stuff. And it ended up that they came back and were like, we really like the work this Tyler Souls guy's doing. And I was like, perfect. That's exactly that was my first choice. So it worked out really well.
And let me back up here just a little bit for people who might not actually know. Gloomhaven is actually a massive board game that changes as you go along in it. Why don't you give a little bit of a descriptor, I guess, on the massive scale of what Gloomhaven actually is, even pre-comic book?
So Gloomhaven is an interesting beast. Before Gloomhaven, there were not really games like Gloomhaven.
Right.
As a matter of fact, when Isaac was sort of running through the motions of like, hey, I've got this game design, I think it's really interesting, and I'm trying to sell it to publishers. Everybody was telling him this won't work. You can't have a $160 game box. There wasn't such a thing really as a legacy game at the time.
Right.
And I mean, I'm a game publisher, right? And I would have told the same thing. The risk on this is at the ceiling. And as it turns out, he ran a Kickstarter and had modest success. Mm-hmm. They made an original edition of the game. It went out, and then all of a sudden, just that core few thousand people just lost their minds, and they created this really active Reddit community on it, and then word just spread and spread and spread, and then he did a second printing Kickstarter, which did $10 million, and then he did an expansion of $14 million, and it became this enormous thing. And then he was just like, okay, cool, I'm in the Gloomhaven business. So it really has a lot of organic growth, and it has exceptionally creative and dedicated fans. That's probably one of the coolest things about it, and also as someone who's playing in that sandbox, one of the most terrifying things about it. Because these are people who will build a table. They'll design and build a table specifically to play Gloomhaven.
Well, so to give people a little bit of an idea, I've been a gamer since the 70s. When I was just a kid, I've got 2 older brothers. Yeah, exactly. The Asian blood, it keeps me young. So I started playing games when I was really young, and so I consider myself to be a true gamer in that regards. Gloomhaven is a game that is not for beginners.
No.
And Gloomhaven is a game if you are looking to up your level of gameplay. It is a massive game, not only in scope and storytelling and quality, but also in pure size. I wasn't smart enough to be prepared and actually have a copy of it sitting here with me, but you can knock out small animals with this box. It is,
the box is this big, this high. Its retails is a huge number. You open it up, it is packed full of stuff. I mean, there's an entire community of people who design storage solutions to hold all their Gloomhaven stuff. And the crazy thing is the game is meant to be sort of destroyed and altered as you play it.
Right.
It's really a one-time experience, and so you need to have a group of people who are very dedicated to this and very into it. And, you know, I used to have a dedicated game group, and they're actually about halfway through Gloomhaven campaign now. I don't have time to kind of do that on a weekly basis, but I go and guest about once a month. And, you know, I'm not as plugged into it as I used to be, but I enjoy the pickup style of Gloomhaven.
Well, to give people an idea too. So when you're talking they're about halfway through, let's give them a ballpark concept of how many hours do you think they've played already?
Oh, you're talking about 3 to 4 hours a week, and they've been playing for almost a solid year now. So you're probably 100 to 120 hours, and you're halfway, right? Mm-hmm. And keeping in mind, like you're destroying. You're destroying cards as you go, and there's a whole meta game with Gloomhaven that, you know, like there's little hidden messages and hidden things in the box and all this stuff that, you know, are really fascinating and really amazing and really well thought out, and have created this very engaged fan base. And
absolutely. So, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I just hope that they like the comic.
So that's what I was going to do here, is bring it kind of full circle. So talking about the game here and how massive of a change it was for the gaming industry, especially in a world where we've been so enthralled with MMOs online and collectible card games in the physical world. This really changed everything for gamers that were really dedicated gamers. How did you go about writing the script then for something like this? Did you still just approach it as a fantasy game or a story? I'm sorry. Or
okay. So the first thing that I did, the Gloomhaven community is very sensitive about spoilers, right? So there's a lot of spoilers in the game you play. So I'm not going to put out any spoilers into the world here. Sure. And I had, we knew the Cephalophair guys socially from the convention circuit and things like that, and we had a friendly relationship. And when they got interested in doing a comic, we just were talking about it, and then one thing led to another about like, oh yeah, I'd love to do it. That's great. But when it got more, when it started getting sort of serious, like, yeah, let's do a Gloomhaven comic. Then I realized, like, okay, now I need to actually. So I got a new version of Gloomhaven, like an unopened version, and got into it and just read every single thing. Right, so all the cards, all the stuff, all the way through the game storyline, because, you know, I didn't know all of that, you know, that aspect of it at all. So I kind of had to like familiarize myself with it. And then, of course, at the same time, it's a fantasy, right? And you know this. You've read, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of comics over the last 40 years, but you've read enough comics that like there are certain things about story structure and certain genres that just work and they're expected and people want to feel that way, right? So with fantasy, you have certain tropes that you want to use to make it work. And then Gloomhaven starts throwing in all this like really interesting and subversive kind of ideas that are a little bit less, fantasy tropey. So I started trying to come up with an idea of how do I kind of put these two things together and make it something that both these hardcore Gloomhaven fans will be like, I recognize this world, right? Because this is not just a matter of like, oh yeah, you're writing Star Wars and everyone knows who Darth Vader is and everybody knows the Skywalker saga and everyone has these expectations. It's almost a level beyond that. These people, their characters exist in this world, right? Like they're playing a role-played version of themselves, so you have to, you want this to be a world where not only does it look and feel familiar to the characters they know and love, but it looks and feels familiar to the characters that they have made up and put in there, right?
Absolutely.
So I want that to be true. At the same time, I want people who have never heard of or never had time or aren't interested in being like, yeah, I'm not interested in playing a 3-hour-a-week board game, but like maybe they like fantasy as a genre. I want them to be like, this feels familiar enough to me to sit down, read it. Maybe I'll enjoy it. Maybe I'll like all the little Gloomhaven tweaks and differences. So, I started, kind of putting together the very basic outlines of like what the story arc would look like and how I would grow it and how it would exist. Because I wanted to stay away from the Gloomhaven story arc, right?
Sure. World of.
Yeah,
but
this
not.
And this is the story arc that exists beforehand. So it's going to kind of lead up to what players know as their narrative.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's a great concept.
So I kind of came up with the rough outlines of a pitch, and it was kind of funny because it was like as we started talking about this, it turned into like, well, we'd really like to do a December release, and to segue into the business side of comics, as you I'm sure are well aware, December right around Christmas is a tough time to have a new release. Right? That's like the slowest time in comic books because people don't tend to buy a floppy comic book as a gift for people. Like they buy the evergreens in our industry. They buy the Absolute Watchmen and Kingdom Come and Sandman, editions. They buy library editions and things like that, but they don't. It's a very slow month for monthlies.
Right.
And so we kind of went back and forth and we're like, okay, well, cool. I think we can still make this work. I think it'll still be cool. And then I wanted to add, there's no Christmas in the world of Gloomhaven, but you start thinking about like, okay, holiday season, what does it mean? What are the elements that, that work for this? Because I did want it to have that feel. So it started with me taking the Ghost of Christmas Past section from A Christmas Carol, right? Specifically the part where they go back to the Fezziwig Christmas party, right? Okay. And they're watching this party happen from the outside, right? So they're kind of looking through the mirror and they're watching these people who are close having this party. And you're watching one of the characters who's now on the outside and you're seeing the beginnings of that character become an outsider, right?
Gotcha.
And I thought that sort of dichotomy was really interesting. I wanted to use that. So that's where the pitch started, was this idea of like this Christmas party. And, through conversations with Isaac and Price, who's sort of our other Cephalofair guy who was in on this, it, morphed and evolved until I finally was like, okay, I think I've got it. And then I wrote, a really detailed sort of beat sheet of like, this is what I think is going to happen on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, all the way through this whole first issue. And then that went in, and then that came back with, because there's Gloomhaven is so huge, right? And so big, and there's so much detail and story and past and the fact of the matter is that a ton of it, like, it's not like they handed me like, oh, here's our encyclopedia of lore. Right? There wasn't such a thing, We had a guy who was super familiar with Gloomhaven and read all about it, who was sort of an advisor, and we had Isaac. And so a lot of this stuff just existed in his head, So I'd be like, I want to do this and that, and this, and that, and then there's a statue here, and the statue's going to be this, and then you would get like, no, the statue can't be that because it's already this thing, as as we're doing, like, okay, got it, and then it would shift and change. So there were a lot of different iterations that it went through, and then I finally got to the point where I had scripted it and kind of done everything, and we had moved into the phase of like, okay, now we're going to start inking. And it was really collaborative, and I felt really good about it because by the time we got all the way through the end of this and all these conversations that we'd had back and forth, because, and at the end of the day, you're playing in somebody else's sandbox, really, and you want to respect what their vision is for all this. But, it still really had this Fezziwig's party vibe. So I was really happy with how the whole thing turned out. And it was, it was surprisingly easy and organic, I think, to make it all work. You know, like it was really just like I'd have an idea for some detail, and you know, it would be some esoteric thing, like the weather, for instance, right? You know, I don't know what the weather in Gloomhaven is like necessarily, right? But Isaac knows. You know, so
Sure.
there would be little details like that, and then he would come back with like all these little details, and I'd start trying to incorporate them bits and pieces. So the script was it was a very different experience from a lot of the. I mean, I've done way more editing now than I ever did than I ever wrote scripts, right? So this felt a lot more like, you know, it's not like I sat down and was like, okay, here's my first draft of the script, here's the 24 pages, and they're ready to roll. It was like, okay, here's the basic idea. You like that? Cool. All right, here's a beat sheet with this really laid out. Like, tell me what you think. Okay, great. Like, okay, so now I've written character descriptions and like sample lines of dialogue for each character. Am I getting this flavor right? Do you like how this sounds? Cool. You know, it was very much like, all right, I'm building the blocks to get to the point where I have the right feel for all these characters, and I'm getting the right feel for this world, and I'm getting the right level of humor and the right level of fantasy and all those different things. Because you know, Gloomhaven has Gloomhaven has a lot of humor in it. You know, it's
Sure.
a little bit.
Well, and you're playing in someone else's sandbox too, so you want to make sure you're getting the tone and the feel and all of that right.
Well, yeah, especially given that
very different for you writing your own characters.
Oh yeah, completely different. And then when you start taking risks with those characters, you know, you really are like, so what do you think about this? And luckily, I mean, Isaac is so, for being the type of person who comes up with a game like Gloomhaven, which is like, you know, I mean, you're extreme detail oriented, right? Like Gloomhaven is an extreme detail oriented game. But he was extremely giving in terms of, I would be like, yeah, I really think it'd be cool to have a character who was like this. And he'd be like, oh yeah, that's great. You know, he was very easy to work with in that sense.
That's awesome.
As long as you were like respecting sort of the history and the lore and the feel of how he defined what Gloomhaven meant. He was very open to different ideas and different takes on the characters. So the characters that I'm using in this beginning of this are a group called the Jaws of the Lion. So they just recently released a new game called Jaws of the Lion, which is done really, really well. It was I don't know if it still is, but I believe it was exclusive to Target stores. But it sold like crazy, and it's like a
mass market people.
Yeah, it's a faster version of Gloomhaven. Right?
Oh, interesting. So real quick to go along with some stuff you're saying there, Dirk Manning, your friend, is in chat here, and he was actually asking, without any spoilers, were there any ideas that you really pushed to get incorporated into the comic?
Yeah, there's several actually. So probably the main thing I would say there's three things that I really wanted to include in the comic that I ultimately did end up there. One is that the city of Gloomhaven has a lot of cults in it. It's a lot of cults in Gloomhaven for whatever reason. There's all these different competing, ideologies. They're always up to no good, right? And I really wanted to sort of poke a little bit of fun at that. So I have one of the characters is sort of always kind of like making bemused, side commentary about like, oh, a cult member. Of course you are. Why wouldn't you be a cult member? And then of course this character is happens to be a magic user. right? And so every time she does a thing, the other members of the group are kind of like, seems a little faulty to me. You know, it's not like I wanted to put the little bit of like a meta humor into it a little bit. You know, something for the guys who've played, the people who've played Gloomhaven through to the end. You know, I wanted a little something that made them feel like, oh yeah, that's definitely. There's a bunch of other things too, little in jokes that, without getting, you know, we didn't make it too obvious, and some of it's going to be stuff that happens, but there's a pretty robust online community of people who talk about Gloomhaven and have, you know, their own little gags about the game and the playing of the game that, you know, I'm sort of very lightly kind of incorporating, you know, because I want those people to feel at home, you know. Sure. Another is that I wanted to write, or I wanted to get started on so Gloomhaven is the name of the city, right? And the story is pretty much all based around the city of Gloomhaven, and it's, you know, close surrounding, you know, areas. And so I wanted to add some urban problems, right? So I wanted this to be that there was, you know, there was a illicit drug trade issue. You know, I wanted there to be, there's you know, some income, there's a class of inequality issue that's happening through this. You know, I wanted there to be the similar types of issues that we see in cities, you know, that we see in a Saginaw or Detroit or anywhere else. You know, I wanted it to feel not so much like, you know, fantasy trope, like, you know, this is the Shire and this is Waterdeep and this is, you know, Rivendell.
Well, you and I have had discussions ages ago where we've talked about different sort of adaptations, you know, and there are so many over the years that have come out, and how a company is doing it either right or wrong. So let's take, you know, you mentioned the Shire. So Lord of the Rings that Jackson did was, especially the first film, was absolutely phenomenal when it came to being a fan of the books, but then also to people in my family that had never read any Tolkien before, were able to watch that film and totally be immersed in it. Whereas you flip that around and let's use the Dungeons and Dragons film as an example, where or the Dungeons and Dragons comic books from the 80s, for example, where you have them be like, oh, the magic user casts fireball, or, you know, or even taking things in script where you go, oh, this character is going to throw a rock and it's going to make the beholder that has literally multiple eyes that can look in different directions fly off and be distracted by it. So where there's fans that just go, what are you doing? Or they're trying too hard to try and make that adaptation relate some way to the original product, which is horrific in a storytelling sort of setting.
Yeah, I think so. The early Dungeons and Dragons comics are a good example of sort of what I want. They're sort of a good example of what I was what I was trying to avoid, right? So you take Lord of the Rings as a good example. You know, they're not page by page retelling of the book, right?
Right.
But when you think about like, okay, what is Lord of the Rings about? Well, Lord of the Rings is about, you know, overcoming adversity even when it's much, much bigger than you, because you're just brave enough and you care enough and you're going to try hard, right? And so they capture those things, you know, and they tell that story and it resonates emotionally with people. It's tough when you talk about a game like Dungeons and Dragons, which is very similar in that it's like people immerse themselves into this. You know, they've made their own characters and they're telling their own stories that exist all over the place, and you're going to tell this story about it, but you also want to like constantly be sort of like, oh, but it's a game too, you know, like, oh, it's a game, you know, you gotta, it's a very, very tough balance with this. And I had some of that with Gloomhaven. And what I tried to do is I tried to sort of identify, okay, what is it about Gloomhaven that is appealing? Like what makes people be like, oh, this is cool. Like without completely ignoring game mechanics, right? Like I don't care that like, oh, it has unique game mechanics. Oh, it's really fun to play. Oh, the battle system is really intuitive. Oh, it's so surprising. It has this ability to surprise you with what you've done. You know, and try to think about like, okay, what makes Gloomhaven feel like a world people want to be in, and then just write the stories that are happening. You know, when the adventuring party that you as the player are walking down the street, all these other characters around have a story going on, and those are the stories I'm trying to tell. Right?
Perfect.
And so I want to find the things that make Gloomhaven feel like it's a thing. And I think one of the main things is that it has a very, to put it in a comic language, it feels like Sin City. You know, it has this very vibrant city. It has tons of characters and tons of places to go and mysteries and government and problems and issues and all this stuff that you can explore as a player if you want to, or you can make your own stories about it or whatever. But there's tons of different stuff happening, and that's ultimately what I really wanted to capture, is this idea that, you know, you get into this city and there's a lot of things happening. You know, it isn't just like, oh, the adventuring party meets at the inn, and then they go on an adventure. Like that happens, yes, right? Like, because you kind of can't get away from some of these tropes because there's you know, Lord of the Rings invented that, you know, and other hundreds of other books have trained us all to like, this is the structure that we like, you know, we like that to happen. So there is that, but it's also subverts that, you know, and tries to make you feel like, yeah, I'm in the city and I'm getting a lot of, you know, taste of what this town is like and why it's like that and what the background is. Because at the same time, I'm trying to, you know, guide this story to get to the point where it's like, okay, and now this is where the story of the games takes off, you know, and hopefully by the time we get there, the game will have been around long enough that I won't get, you know, tarred and feathered by writing that story. Because I do want to write the story that the game tells because it's so good. But if I were to do it now, I'd get hunted down probably.
Well, sure, especially because there's so many things in game that are, like you said, surprising, or things that are twists or whatnot.
Many.
Yeah, there are two specific products that I like to mention when having these type of discussions, especially relating to the idea of Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy games. I still think hands down the #1 best Dungeons and Dragons film is actually 13th Warrior with Antonio Banderas. Even though it has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons at all, the structure of the film, watching it for the first time, I remember just going, oh my God, this feels like an adventure. You know, it feels like these characters are ones that I could be making the choices for and having the dungeon master describe the events and have it all roll out to me.
It's an awesome movie. I love that movie. It's also probably the best movie, you know, version of Beowulf ever too, you know.
Of what?
That's kind of it's Beowulf, isn't it? Isn't it like here's a different point of view, but it's the Beowulf story, right? But with this other character sort of added in.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the way that they did certain scenes were just brilliant. The scenes where his character is learning the language is just phenomenal. And then, without giving spoilers, I guess the movie has been out for decades now. But you know,
I think we get away with that.
Yeah, but the scene where with the dragon in the film, and having how it's described and having how the characters witness and experience everything that's happening is just phenomenal. And then the comic book, the second thing, when it comes to fantasy, is I think Rat Queens, hands down, catches the flavor of being in a party, an adventuring party, in a fantasy world. And I mean, they even go so far to be like, you know, they're gangs, different groups, right? And you could say, oh, this is my character group, and oh, you run into this other one or whatever. But it has a feel like Dungeons and Dragons, which is brilliant because I don't think any of them were designed necessarily to be that specific thing. But for me, then to turn around and watch movies like Dungeons and Dragons, starring the Wayans, or even the comic books, which are they're some goods to them, right? And the Forgotten Realms ones weren't awful, but they're things that I sit back and I go, as a fan, my God, how hard could it really be for something to be made so I can truly enjoy this? And obviously, I know the answer to that is exceptionally hard. But
yeah, I mean, especially when you're talking about something like that. So, when you talk about Dungeons and Dragons, you're talking about a thing that's, owned by Wizards of the Coast, which is in turn owned by Hasbro. So you're talking about dealing with multiple layers of corporate control and all these layers of approval and a lot of fingers in the pot. A lot of people are like telling you, well, it's got to be this and it's got to be that and it's got to be this and it's got to be that. And it turns into like, it's a very, very hard job. For me, I mean, I'm talking directly to the be all end all guy,
nice.
And so it was, who is also like very easy to work with, and so, I did not have some of those challenges to try to take a property with that much corporate control and try to make something with it. So, so that's a little bit, it's a very different animal than what I dealt with. But for Rat Queens, I'm a huge fan of Rat Queens. I have every single issue. Curtis Weeb, the guy who writes it, I consider him a friend. I've seen him at shows. I still email with him on a semi-regular basis. We've done some business together. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant writer. I certainly was influenced by Rat Queens with Gloomhaven.
Oh, nice. Very cool.
There's I would say that there were many times where I would think of a gag, because there's quite a bit of like underscoring of comedy, I think, in the book. And there were many times where I would be like, I would be like, I would love to steal the Rat Queens gag for that, right? Because so many of them are so good.
Sure.
The other thing is that Rat Queens is a very adult comic, right?
Yes.
And this is a more of a something that is, maybe teen plus or lower. So it's meant to be a somewhat broader level of audience than what Rat Queens is. But there is absolutely a huge influence of Rat Queens in terms of that Rat Queens feels like this is the adventure party that me and my dumb friends would make, right? This is how we would behave. Mm-hmm. And that idea of, this world where like you as the reader are like, yeah, I could see me and my friends acting in this way and talking to each other in this way and being loyal to each other, but also wanting to poke fun at each other constantly. That is something I absolutely took from Rat Queens and tried my best to inject into the Gloomhaven world, because it's brilliant. I mean, I think that's part of the reason. I mean, Rat Queens is a book, that has had a lot of ups and downs and a lot of drama associated with it over the years. All the different artists and issues with artists and all the stuff,
Right.
And yet the readership has remained, right? And it's because that people, they feel like they belong in that world, right? Like they feel like this is
Yeah,
the thing.
absolutely. And that harkens back to conversations we've had in the past about comic books and, you know, is it art that draws people in? Is it story? Is it this? Is it that? You know, what is the reason why people choose comic books over, you know, something else? Whether it's, especially today's day and age where we have 8 million different streaming systems out there for us, all competing,
Yep.
and you know, you have Disney Plus putting out a billion different things that all of us geeks are freaking out about, you know. But and then you have news about potentially DC getting rid of, you know, their monthly publications or this and that, and you got, you know, the world is in such a weird tipping point for the comic book industry right now, and you know, it's fascinating to think about all this stuff and to talk about it. Um, but yeah, man, I mean, it's cool that you are, and I've known you for years and years and years, so I know that you're someone that's not just a creator. You're a fan. You're doing something you love. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
This isn't your originally. This wasn't your main job, right? I mean,
no. This it evolved. You know, I mean, just to give people who might not know. So I've known Andy for about 13 years or so.
Somewhere around
that. The very first comic strip I ever wrote, I brought to you to read. The very first time I ever did a signing was in your store. You know, when I was giving away that book for free.
Yeah.
You know, you were around when I formed the company. You've been around as the company has grown and done its thing and done this.
Michigan's Comic Collective.
Michigan Comic Collective, which was the thing I did before the publishing company. You know, as it's done it, and you know, now we've gotten up to where it's like a, you know, we're kind of a full-fledged studio with we own a warehouse, we own office space, we have 15 full-time employees. You know, we publish games and comics and books and, you know, all this stuff. So we're just, you know, so you've certainly been around and watched a lot of this happen. But in many, many ways, I am still very much the exact same person who will get very emotionally invested in arguing about, you know, the minutia of business. And it's only gotten worse as I've more plugged in to the business. But the one thing I think that is the same is, as much as the market shifts and changes, and that's happening a lot, like this year especially has been very interesting. As much as that shifts and changes, you know, people want to read comic books, right? Most of them want to read it as a physical item. You know, they want it to be a thing. And I think some of that is a little bit of a holdover of the collectible aspect of it, because that's certainly still a major part of the industry and a big thing. But I think more of it is just that, like Douglas Adams said about books, you know, they're like sharks. They haven't evolved in a meaningful way in 80 million years because they're very good at being sharks. Books are just, they're very good at being books, and people like them the way they are.
Sure.
You know, so a comic book was not supplanted by a digital revolution in the same way that, say, music had a digital revolution that completely supplanted the industry as it stood before. So when I kind of look at, like, okay, there's all these choices, a million choices for people to, you know, read this or do that, or all, like, where were they going to spend their entertainment dollar, right? Like, I don't worry about that as a content creator, as a publisher, because in comics, it's always been that way, right? There's always been a million titles for people to choose from. There's always been all these different characters and all these things. And as you know, and I think I remember talking to you about this a decade ago, every person that walks into a store or makes an order online from a retailer, they have X amount of money to spend, and they're going to spend that X.
Yep.
No matter what, right? And so the question is, what are they going to spend the X on, right?
Right.
And so it's less about, like, oh, can we compete with The Mandalorian on Disney Plus? Like, absolutely not, right? But we're not in that business, you know. Like,
right.
the people who are into comics and want to buy comics and want to read these stories, you know, that audience, I think, is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and more interested in more diverse things. And I think what comics has been good at for its entire existence, which is appealing to this smaller hardcore audience, is what we're seeing reflected in streaming TV shows now, right? Because if you took the audience of, I don't know, if you took the audience of like random popular streaming show, right, and compared it to what was considered like good enough TV ratings in the 90s to stay on the air,
sure,
they're probably not even comparable, right? It's getting to the point now where it's like, if you have a streaming show and it does 1 million people, like, oh, huge success, amazing, right?
Sure.
Like, do you remember when we were younger? Like, you had to have, like, Friends was doing like 18 million people a week, right? That's what it took to propagate.
Well, the world is a different place now, though, too, when it comes to
all the audiences
like
are getting splintered into these smaller little subgroups of people being able to pick and choose exactly the entertainment they want. And I'm like, and for me, I'm like, that's great, because comics has always been that way. It's always
yeah. Well, it's also interesting to look at what streaming actually means behind the scenes in the real world too, right? Because Netflix or whatever, Disney Plus, they're not making money the way that other companies used to back in the day. And so the way you look at numbers has to shift, you know, because so much now is the data that's being collected by what people are watching, or, you know, so much behind the scenes stuff that it's become a completely different industry now, as far as the people that are looking, is this show worth continuing, or should we renew this for another season? And unfortunately, there's so many things that get in the way of my entertainment, right? I mean, we've talked about that before, you know, whether it's actors' egos, you know, or currently we have all of the Marvel stuff that's on TV is being kind of, there's an end of that era happening right now. All the stuff that was under the umbrella of mind blank. Jeff Loeb, right? Wasn't he the guy that was doing all the Marvel?
Yeah, he was Marvel TV. The last thing Jeff Loeb did was Hellstrom, which was
and you know, I enjoyed it for what it was. I found it interesting when I first started watching it that the Marvel branding was not there. You know, it kind of had a Marvel logo, but it didn't use the typical flashing of comic pages thing. And so I instantly knew that it was something they were kind of separating out on purpose visually, even by that little thing. But then reading that was kind of the last thing under his umbrella, and then them not renewing it because they've got that's the end of his stuff that he's associated with, right? So regardless of how much I enjoyed the show, it's not going to get a second season, and likely those actors won't be coming back to those characters, even with whatever they're doing in the future, even though there's going to be these different segments that Marvel is going to be doing. But it's interesting to see how this is all the chips are going to start landing here, especially after a year of COVID, and where things are going to go with movie theaters and streaming and everything next year.
Oh yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting how all that lays out. And you know, and you're seeing a lot of the major players are starting to try to change up how they're doing stuff, and there's a lot of agglomeration happening. But the way I look at it is, it's like, great, cool, because all that, to me, what that does is it just creates room above my head. You know, like, that's just making room in the middle for me to move in there, right? For me to go from being small to medium sized, and I'm happy to do that. So, you know, and honestly, you know, at the end of next year, no matter what happens with all that stuff, comics are still going to be here, and there's still going to be this like weird, long and skinny shaped thing with a corner box, and it's still going to be a thing. They might be sold differently. I mean, like right now, we're looking at a situation where we've had one major distributor for 35 years, and they're great at things or not great at other things. We've had the direct market for I think 37 years now, or somewhere in that neighborhood. Great at some things, maybe not great at other things.
You're very much the politician right now. Speaking as a retailer right now, you and I have had some very closed door, interesting conversations about all.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But very
for sure. But those those things are not going to go away immediately. I think there's going to be some changes. There'll be shifts, and there'll be differences in how business is happening. But the books themselves, the readers, and the people who want the content, I think, are still going to be there. I mean, you're a good example of someone who's, that this year has changed how you traditionally did business in the comics industry.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know all the details, and I don't know how much from you want to talk about, but you're now doing like a touchless delivery type system because you had to roll with like, what are the changes and how am I going to deal with them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you're putting comics in people's hands in a very different way. And
yeah,
there's going to be more of that.
Yeah, we decided, a while ago, maybe not soon enough, but we needed to change how we were going to be running our business. At the Jefferson store location, we were there for 26 years, almost to the day, before we decided we had to physically close our doors. And despite what it says on Google right now, we are still open. So Collector's Corner Incorporated still getting comic books and trying to grow the comic community here locally in Michigan. We are doing no contact delivery. We are shipping worldwide, and we actually even have a relationship with the local UPS store here where we have scheduled pickups available too. And we do the scheduled pickups for free. And so I have a lot of irons in the fire on things that we want to try and start moving towards. Some ideas, super, super grandiose, that cost a lot of money and probably will never happen, but I like to dream big. And some others, and some others that are very, very likely to start happening sometime here very shortly. But the end all is, we're really focusing on the no contact delivery directly to your door. We, sometimes can't beat the Amazon delivery rate or whatnot, but I've never thought of them as my competition anyway. But so we are still around. We are still doing this. We still want to do more things like this that are bringing creators directly to the consumers, to be able to do things, even next year when COVID hopefully is less of a thing and things are more safe for us. Diamond just announced that they're doing Free Comic Book Day on my birthday, August 14th. So we're going to plan on doing some sort of event for that, even though we don't currently have a physical store to be able to do that. And so one of the things that we're dealing with, though, is how do we keep our name in people's minds? There isn't a physical store for people to come to. People that come to where my store used to be don't necessarily know that I still exist, and so maybe they're buying something from whoever is there now or whatnot. But we're still trying to make sure we keep the idea of comic books and Collector's Corner Incorporated merged together. Stan Lee did an amazing job at making his name completely inseparable from Marvel Comics, which was brilliant. And so, I'll never get to that level, but at least locally here to kind of have that happen is definitely what we're working for. And I really appreciate you doing things like this. And hopefully for whatever the plans are for Free Comic Book Day, that we can have you and Source point out for whatever we're doing.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely. We'll certainly do something. I don't remember seeing what the date. What's the date?
August 14th.
August 14th.
Yeah,
Okay.
why they chose that date, I have no idea. They're moving it off of the standard May thing, but I think it's mostly because they want to try and push it back far enough where
We
there
wanted to
won't
try to
be any
be as
issues.
possible. You know, a lot of places, you know, I mean, we were like a convention live event based company, right?
Mhm.
And that's how we built everything that we did, is like one person at a time, putting paper in people's hands, traveling constantly.
Oh yeah.
And when that ended at the very beginning of March, um, you know, that really hurt us. And then by the end of March, you know, now when Diamond stopped shipping, and then game distribution, because you know, Oxide Media, which is now the parent company that owns SourcePoint and Deep Water Games, and all that. When that happened, you know, we went 4 months with no distribution, no conventions. So it was, you know, it could have potentially been crippling. I'm glad to say that we were able to pivot, and we built a very robust online community of people who were buying stuff direct. And we also had like a stroke of luck or genius by some folks who weren't me, who thought like you know, like while I was at C2E2 over that last weekend of February. I don't know if you went to. I don't remember. Did you go to C2E2 this last year?
Not this year. Not this year.
No.
It's been a staple for my family and I, but unfortunately, we weren't able to make it this year.
So I was at C2E2, and this was all just starting, right? It was kind of starting. There were some rumblings that they were going to cancel Seattle at C2E2, which is like the next weekend. And all this was happening, but C2E2 was still like wildly successful. And on that same weekend, we had a show in Texas, and we had a huge show, PAX East in Boston, right, which is a giant gaming convention. So we had people in 3 different cities across the U.S. doing these shows. And all this stuff was happening, and somehow a couple of my guys thought to themselves, like, this is starting to look pretty, so like something's going to happen. We're going to get most of our product shipped to us that the distributors are holding. So, you know, we ended up like renting the storefront next to us and just stuffing it full of all of our product, you know, just before everything sort of shut down. So we had all this stuff that we were able to, and that's, you know, I'm happy to say that we didn't lay anybody off, and everything ended up working out. But I mean, March especially was very, very tight. You know, and things worked out. But we were a live show based company, you know, up until this year. That's what we did, and I want that to come back. But even if, you know, we've got the vaccines are getting rolled out now and all that, and I suspect that in a few months things are going to start looking better. The problem is that this is not going to leave like the collective unconscious of us for a long time.
Sure.
It's not going to be like, well, now suddenly I'm comfortable standing in a room with 80,000 other people again. You know, like I think it's going to be a couple of years of time, and I think it's more than just. I mean, I don't know how it's been for you, but my wife and I and our family have been pretty strict with quarantine and everything else. This is the healthiest I've been for a year running, right? Like,
yeah.
I like in terms of just I haven't been sick, I haven't gotten the flu, I haven't gotten, you know, strep throat or any of the things that you get when you have a little kid in school, right?
Sure.
I haven't had any of that stuff, and I'm kind of like, I might never go back to no mask. You know what I mean? Like,
you know, I mean, there's a lot to be said about some of the things that you sit back and you look and you go, God, why weren't some of these things just a part of regular life to begin with? And now that they are, maybe we'll be able to see some changes. But yeah, absolutely. The amount of people that I know that have been taking things seriously, that have had just a common cold, you know, I mean, it's been
few, right?
Yeah, so much less than what it was before. And yeah, you know, it's going to be interesting to see where this all goes, where people are going to feel comfortable doing things moving forwards, and how long that's going to take.
Yeah, I would look at it like this. You know, I mean, we can look at it like it's a smaller thing and a bigger thing, right? So, New York Comic Con, right? You know, monster show, 250,000 people over 4 days. You know, it's going to cost me 30 grand to go there. We've got a big main floor set up and hotels and a team of 12 people and all this stuff. Awesome show. I love it. But, you know, if they had had New York this year, right? Like, let's say that they had gotten the vaccine out in July and it was like, okay, we can start having gatherings again. Would they have pulled 250,000 people? Absolutely not. You know, it would have been a shadow of its former self.
Sure, it's such a weird.
It's worth me putting up the money to do it. Probably not, right?
Right. Well, it's such a weird thing, right? To think about, because so many people are itching to get back out and for things to be normal. And you know, Midland, where we live, is an interesting town to say the least. And nothing against it. I love living here.
Well, it's a bubble though, you know, like you.
Yeah, but
in
I mean,
Midland,
it's
you live in a little
interesting
bit of a bubble.
to kind of watch where people are falling in the different lines behind how to proceed, how serious to take things. And I think overall, the end result is we need to take health concerns just seriously, and then once we get to a point where we can have conventions or sporting events or any of these other things that people are dying for, maybe that's a bad term to use, that people are really excited for. But hey, to see where they're going to be going with all this and where it's all going to be comfortable will definitely be interesting. But I think there are more people out there right now that are so anxious to get back to a sense of normal that they're willing to risk things that they shouldn't be. And so that's where my concern runs. You know,
I think that there are some people like that. I think that for the most part, I expect there to be a return to some shows next year. Some conventions will come back. I think it will take a couple years before they build themselves back up to what it was before it ended. And I think if you look at Free Comic Day, I did your Free Comic Day, your store for several years, and you know, for you know, I mean, man, it seems like you'd have 500 people, 600 people would come through the store sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, at this point right now, can you even imagine having this?
Oh, yeah,
going through that little tiny area? You know, it'd be a nightmare, you know? So I think it's going to take a little while. So I didn't know what date it was, but I'm not surprised that they're going to push it back. I imagine that Diamond actually probably is still in the midst of taking a lot of flack for the last Free Comic Book Day thing with the it's not gonna, no one's gonna be able to do it, but also you guys already paid for this stuff, so good luck.
Yeah, I mean, it was a no-win situation there. I still have stuff. But you know, we've been also interacting with the community where I've made offers, and to anyone watching this, it's still valid. Anyone that pays for shipping, if you're outside of my local community, I will send free comic books to you guys from Free Comic Book Day that I have. You know, we offered it up to Usagi Ojimbo Dojo and a variety of different places. But you know, these books are meant to be out in the wild, out in the public. So, you know, you don't need to make a purchase. I mean, I can't afford, unfortunately, to ship for free to anyone anywhere. But you pay for shipping. I will send these comic books wherever you want them. That's the design of what Collector's Corner has been about for Free Comic Book Day. Where I hope that we'll be able to do something locally and something awesome for the 20th anniversary in August. We'll still do what we have always done, and that's to build our community, to be something that's exciting for people of like minds to get together and enjoy.
Well, I mean, do you see, or I mean, are you looking to, once things calm down more, are you looking to eventually have a brick and mortar again, or are you hoping to just continue kind of what you're doing and develop this side of the business, or what are you thinking?
I think at this point right now, not having a brick and mortar store might actually be the best thing for us, you know. But it's really hard to say. I'm not 100% sure where everything in the future is going to run for us, but at least for now, and for the foreseeable future, doing something along this lines is what we're going to do. I mean, I would love to have a device that is functional as far as being as recognizable as like an ice cream truck, right? Or
That's a great idea.
and you know, there's nothing like that here in the U.S. yet. So it's a matter of trying to come up with the funds to be able to put something like that together. Because
you got to get a vehicle is a great idea.
Yeah. We'll have to talk more about this off camera and.
That's a fun idea. I like that idea actually.
Yeah, awesome.
Almost like it's like a bookmobile, but it's kind of a mobile nerd store.
That's exactly what kind of some of my irons are in. And
I mean, imagine everywhere that has like food truck festivals and things you could go to.
Exactly.
And have like, oh, here's something free for the kids, and oh, when we sell books and comics and some things here and there and all that kind of. I mean, that's an interesting idea because that stuff exists all over the place.
Not in the comic industry yet, but don't be giving all my ideas away for people to steal.
No, I'm on it now.
Bastard.
Yeah, you need to buy like a bread truck or something and just trick the whole thing out.
There's definitely a lot of ideas I've been looking at already, but that is number one of my kind of dream big ideas. So,
that's a really interesting idea. There's also, because even like if you take like Midland and Saginaw and Flint too, for that matter, all have obviously in the wintertime this doesn't help you much, but they have very vibrant farmers markets.
Oh yeah.
All three of those communities do.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I've looked at farmers markets, and at least here in Midland, they specifically revolve around things that are homegrown and not things that are mass produced. So things like
I was thinking how they all have food trucks that show up every week. You know.
Yeah, their idea here in Midland specifically is that each one of the food trucks are doing a thing that they created. So, one of the other things that you may remember is we have a food allergy in our family. So life-threatening allergy and tree nuts. So we looked at even doing some prepackaged items, trying to get out and into our community by companies that produce things that are safe for our family. But they wouldn't let us do that down at the farmers market because it was something that was being mass produced and prepackaged and things like that. So it's an interesting kind of line that they're drawing, but we'll see. Like I said, I've got a lot of kind of irons in the fire that I'm working on. So, but I do see that
the main point is that the industry, the publishing industry for comics especially, is changing, and it's going to keep changing, and there's going to be different ways that, and some of it's going to work and some of it isn't, right? Like DC right now they've made a lot of bold decisions, Well,
we'll see where they're going ahead here. I mean, with all the news articles that are coming out about potentially what's happening in the next new while. But I think that could be another conversation completely of its own. It's going to be interesting.
We can talk about that off camera. I mean, I had a really interesting experience with them over the summer. That was kind of nuts. But they're like a lot of retailers are very upset about it. Others less so. But regardless, they're making decisions that are going to be different, and
that are going to be industry changing decisions. I mean,
I think so.
I mean, and everything they've done in 2020 has been industry changing. I mean, you can back up to whatever news story you want, and if it's headline DC, it has been something that has been good or bad, whatever you argue, has been industry changing, from firing of people to moving people around to different positions to distribution to everything. And I've talked about DC because I've been a DC guy since my childhood, and a lot of my fears or hopes or dreams or whatever that are coming about, whether it's in print or their films or whatnot. I mean, there's so much to dissect there, and then, like I said, it'll be interesting. But that would be another great video for us to go live on and discuss, or even just to discuss behind the scenes and stuff that's not public. But yeah, I mean, that's near and dear to my heart. So I've been very concerned with what they've been doing as a fan and as a retailer for a long time now, but kind of riding the wave here.
I mean, we'll find out. Like, I'm sure a bunch of things are going to bite them in the ass, and other things they might find things that work. And when they find things that work, it's going to change everything for everyone else down the line.
Hands down. I mean, like it or not, regardless of what you say, dollar shares or anything versus Marvel or whatnot, they're still the big two. Their characters are the most iconic characters in the world. Anywhere you go, you can, have people that will recognize the Superman symbol or whatnot. I mean, it's bigger than even any DC brand. It's something completely different than anything else any comic company has to deal with. But I do see that we are running over an hour now. So I think that we need to kind of wrap this up. I've got some other fires that I have to deal with, but I would love to continue this conversation with you more.
Sure, absolutely, anytime.
And real quick to recap this stuff, Gloomhaven, SourcePoint Press. I don't have a copy of it here because I'm not important enough to get an advanced copy.
Jeez, here we go.
But comes out this Wednesday. We do have it on our website available for purchase and to get no contact delivery here in Midland. We ship it worldwide. If I do sell out by some chance, message me directly. We can get more copies. Travis on SourcePoint Press has variant covers that are exclusive to your website, right? Available.
Yep.
We'll add some
glad link.
And
do you want the link for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll put it in the chat for this. Does that work?
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Thank you very much, Eric, for all your comments. I appreciate it.
Oh boy, that guy.
Yeah, that guy.
Probably a lot of disrespecting of my expertise.
This is coming from a man who can't type and talk at the same time. So
typing and talking at the same time is hard. I was gonna send. I'm. Let's see. Which Facebook do you use? Do you use the Collector's Corner one?
So it's one that says "Stay home, stay safe" on it. Is our main page. We accidentally have two Facebook pages,
all right,
which I'm in the process of trying to fix.
Here, I'm going to send you a digital copy of Gloomhaven right now, so you can read it and then tell everybody that the guy who wrote that garbage.
Awesome.
Anyway, hopefully people pick it up, read it.
How many issues is the series?
So it's starting off. This is sort of a one shot, and then right now, actually worked on it this morning. There's another 4 that are going to be coming out in several months, and then I'm putting the pitch together. I just sort of kind of worked out what the next 8 are. So at the end of the whole thing, at least this sort of maxi arc should be 13. Okay. This one that's coming out functions as a one shot. It has a beginning, middle, and end. and you know, it introduces the characters and sets some things up, but it is meant to stand by itself. So
Perfect.
at the end of the whole thing, it should be 13. So if, you know, I ever get to do a library edition, it'll have those 13 issues in it.
Awesome. That sounds great. Thanks again, Travis Mcintire from SourcePoint Press, for joining us today at Collectors Corner Incorporated, our first live broadcast.
Yeah.
Thanks to everyone in chat for leaving us some comments, and we will randomly choose one of you people to get a free copy of Gloomhaven #1. And I will reach out to contact you soon. And please keep eye out on our Facebook page for anything else that we're going to be doing. Like us, subscribe, all those things that I'm supposed to say here as a professional that I'm not. And thank you so much, guys. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.